She was 4 years old. She weighed 38 pounds and stood just tall enough to reach the second shelf of the kitchen pantry, which her mother always said was a problem because that was where she kept the cookies. On the morning of June 14th, 1963, Anna Louise Pierce put on her yellow dress, the one with the white buttons her grandmother had sewn on, walked out the back door of their farmhouse in Harlan County, Kentucky, and vanished from the earth. That is not a story about a little girl who wandered too far into the woods. That is a story about a child who was taken, deliberately and completely, from a family that would spend the next 6 decades searching for what no one believed they would ever find. And it would take a retired genealogist, a single question asked at a dinner table in Florida, and a DNA database that didn't exist when Anna was born to finally bring her home. But before we get to any of that, we have to go back to that June morning in eastern Kentucky. Because to understand what was found, you first have to understand what was lost. Harlan County in 1963 was the kind of place that looked like America, the way people remembered America, or at least the way they wanted to. Coal kept the economy running, and coal families kept each other running, and there was a grammar of daily life there that most people who grew up in it never quite found anywhere else. Screen doors that slapped shut behind you in summer. The smell of biscuits and coffee before 6 in the morning. Church on Sunday and garden work on Saturday, and nothing that happened between two families that didn't travel down the road before supper. Robert and Della Pierce had lived on Clover Creek Road since before their oldest was born. Robert worked the number 2 seam at the Cornette Lewis mine, 7 years by then, solid and trusted. Della kept the home, 4 children, a garden, a dog named Rusty who slept under the porch, and a reputation for putting out the best blackberry cobbler in 3 Hollows. They were not a wealthy family by the measures that appeared in newspapers, but they were anchored, known, and woven into the fabric of that county in the way that takes generations to build. Anna was the youngest. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn streak and a way of laughing that her older sister Carol would describe 60 years later as a sound that filled a room before you knew what was funny. She carried a small cloth rabbit named Buster everywhere she went. She had started asking about starting school. She was 4 years and 2 months old. That morning, Della had hung laundry on the line behind the house and sent the children into the yard to play. The older 3 stayed near the garden fence. Anna followed Rusty toward the tree line at the edge of the property, which she had done 100 times before and which had never been a problem because the yard was small and the line of sight was clear, and Harlan County was the kind of place where 4-year-olds were safe in their own backyards. That was the last morning things were the way they had always been. By 9:45, Rusty had come back without her. Della called from the porch, once, twice. She walked to the tree line herself, calling Anna's name into the birch and pawpaw scrub that marked the edge of the Pierce property. Nothing came back but the cicadas. By 10 o'clock, she had checked the house, under the beds, in the closets, in the root cellar. Anna's cloth rabbit was on the kitchen floor near the back door, which meant she had not gone far on her own. Anna never went anywhere without Buster. By 10:30, Della Pierce was running. She went to the Combs house first, 300 yards up the road, and then the Arnett's, and the word moved through the hollow the way it always moved when something was wrong, from porch to porch and up the road until Robert Pierce was pulled off shift at Cornette Lewis at 11:22 and was back at the farm in 12 minutes. Sheriff Elmer Watts of Harlan County arrived by early afternoon with 2 deputies and enough neighbors to form a search line. They combed the tree line, the creek bed, the old Combs barn that had been empty since 1958. They searched through the afternoon heat. They searched into the evening. They searched until the light failed completely. Anna was not there. Her yellow dress was not there. Not a footprint, not a thread. What was found, and what would become the single most important detail in a case that would spend decades unsolved, was a set of tire tracks in the soft soil of the logging road that ran along the property's eastern boundary. Tracks that belonged to a vehicle wider than a farm truck. Tracks pointing north toward the county road. Tracks that had been made that morning and had dried in the summer heat before anyone thought to look for them. Sheriff Watts had them photographed. He had a cast made. He filed it. Nobody followed it north. The investigation that summer was measured in good intentions and bad luck in roughly equal parts. Sheriff Watts was not, by the standards of 1963 rural Kentucky, a negligent man. He was thorough enough and experienced with the kind of crimes that happened in that county: theft, trespass, the occasional violence that came out of a bad Saturday night. But a child who disappeared without a scream, without a witness, without a body, that was something the training of 1963 didn't prepare you for. The first suspect the department focused on was a man named Gerald Hoskins, a drifter who had been seen near the Clover Creek Road area 2 days before Anna vanished and who had a prior arrest for public drunkenness in Bell County. Deputies brought him in within the week. He was questioned over 2 days, gave a credible account of his whereabouts, and was released when 3 separate witnesses placed him in a tavern in Cumberland on the morning of June 14th. He was crossed off the list. The second name that surfaced was a former Combs family hand named Vernon Sloan, who had left the area abruptly after a dispute about wages 2 weeks before Anna's disappearance. Investigators tracked him to Knoxville by August. He was interviewed, provided documentation, and was eliminated. While the sheriff's department pursued those leads and then watched them collapse, Robert Pierce was doing something else. He had gotten a notebook, a simple composition book from the Harlan Variety Store, and he had begun writing down everything, every name, every date, every face he didn't recognize, every vehicle he hadn't seen before the 14th. He wrote down the tire tracks. Della, meanwhile, made the calls that a mother makes when no one in authority believes you enough. She wrote to the FBI field office in Louisville. She wrote to the governor's office. She wrote to anyone she could find an address for. Most letters were not answered. One FBI response came back 6 weeks later, 3 sentences long, noting that the matter appeared to be under appropriate local jurisdiction. By October, the search had formally ended. The case file sat in the Harlan County Sheriff's Office in a manila folder. Sheriff Watts would say later, when pressed, that his best guess was that Anna had wandered farther than anyone realized, and that the creek had taken her somewhere she hadn't been found. It was the explanation that required the least complication. It was also wrong, and Robert Pierce knew it was wrong, and he kept his notebook. The years that followed had the weight of geology. They moved slowly and deposited things and changed the shape of everything without anyone marking the exact moment the change occurred. By 1968, 5 years had passed. Carol Pierce was in high school. The 2 boys had grown into teenagers who worked the same mines their father did. Robert still kept his notebook, which was now 2 notebooks, and which Della had stopped asking him about, because the asking made the grief fresh in a way that daily life had learned to dull at the edges. She kept Anna's photograph on the mantel. She did not put it away, and she did not add to it, because there was nothing to add. By 1975, the farmhouse on Clover Creek Road had been sold. The family had moved to Middlesboro when Robert's back gave out and the mine work ended. The new family on Clover Creek Road did not know who Anna Pierce was. To them, it was just a house. By 1983, 20 years had passed. Robert Pierce drove back to Harlan County once a year, in June, and walked the old property line and the logging road. He always brought the photograph. He never spoke to anyone about what he was doing because there was nothing useful to say. He had retired his notebooks to a shoebox. He had not stopped. In 1991, a reward poster that Carol Pierce had put up in the Middlesbrough diner, handmade, laminated, with Anna's 4-year-old face and the date and the phone number, had faded in the window until the photograph was barely recognizable. The diner owner, Martha Sexton, did not take it down. She just put it a little farther from the direct light. Robert Pierce died in 1997, 34 years after his daughter disappeared. He left the shoeboxes to Carol. And every case on this channel represents weeks of research, combing through records, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that deserved better. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like this one, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. And leave a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. We read everyone. Now, let's get back to Anna. Carol Pierce Hutchinson was 59 years old in 2011, living outside Lexington, working as a school librarian, when she got a call from a woman named Sandra Boyle, who ran a Kentucky genealogy forum online. Someone had posted a query matching a case Sandra recognized as related to the Harlan County disappearance from 1963. It wasn't much, but it was a thread. That thread led nowhere for another decade. Then in 2022, something changed that no one had anticipated. The phone call that broke the Anna Pierce case open did not come to a police department. It came to a semi-retired genealogical researcher named Patricia Elwood, who lived in Clearwater, Florida, and who had been doing volunteer work with the Doe Network, a nonprofit database matching unidentified persons to open missing persons cases, for 11 years. In March of 2022, Patricia had been asked by a caseworker in Sarasota County to look at a woman who had come forward at a senior care facility, cognitively impaired, who had told a nurse that her name wasn't the name on her records, that she had another name, that she had been taken from somewhere when she was small. Patricia had heard this kind of claim before. Usually they didn't go anywhere. But she had also learned, in 11 years of this work, that you followed the thread until it ended. Because sometimes it didn't end where you expected. The woman in the care facility was 63 years old. Her documented identity placed her birthday in 1960, which would have made her 3 in 1963. The name on her records was Mary Elaine Grover. But when Patricia sat with her and showed her photographs, not of Anna, but of Kentucky, of Harlan County, of the kind of farmhouse that would have been common in that area in the 1960s, the woman's eyes changed. She said quietly that she remembered a dog named Rusty. Patricia Elwood called the Kentucky State Police Cold Case Unit the next morning. She had been working long enough to know that one detail about a dog named Rusty in 1963 in Harlan County was not a coincidence. It was a door. The DNA process that followed uses publicly available genealogy databases, the same websites where ordinary people upload their family histories to find cousins they never knew, and cross-references biological samples to trace familial lines back to a common source. The sample came from the woman at the care facility. It was compared against a submission that Carol Pierce Hutchinson had made to the database in 2019 on the advice of a cold case advocate who had found her through the Doe Network forum. The results came back on a Tuesday in May. Detective Marianne Cobbs of the Kentucky State Police Cold Case Unit called Carol Pierce Hutchinson at 7:40 in the morning. Carol answered on the second ring. The name the woman had been given when she was taken was not a name. It was an erasure. The couple who had raised her, a childless pair from the Sarasota area named Roy and Frances Grover, had died in the 1990s without ever confessing what they had done. What investigators reconstructed over the following months was this. Roy Grover, Originally from Clay County, Kentucky, the county directly north of Harlan, had been in the area in June of 1963, visiting relatives. He had been seen, though never listed as a suspect, in the vicinity of Clover Creek Road. A farm truck with unusual tire width, a logging road pointing north. Robert Pierce had written Roy Grover's plate number in his notebook. Not because he suspected him, just because it was a plate he didn't recognize on a road he knew. The shoebox that Carol kept in her closet in Lexington held 34 years of her father's careful, grieving attention to detail. And in the second notebook, on page 41, in Robert Pierce's deliberate handwriting, was Roy Grover's license plate. The arrest could not come. Roy Grover had been dead for 27 years. Francis Grover had died of a stroke in 2003. The criminal case had no living defendants. But there was something else. The woman at the care facility, Anna Pierce, now known legally under her restored name, had been told the truth in the gentlest way the caseworkers knew how. Carol Pierce Hutchinson flew to Clearwater in June of 2022. 59 years after Anna had walked out the back door in her yellow dress, her sister sat across from her at a small table in a room overlooking a courtyard full of hibiscus. Carol said later that she did not know what she had expected. She had imagined that moment for her entire life and had not once imagined it correctly. Anna looked at her for a long time. Then she said the name, Carol. She did not remember where she had heard it, but she remembered it. The Anna Pierce case has changed the way the Kentucky State Police Cold Case Unit handles genealogical DNA submissions from families of the long missing. A protocol now exists, written in part because of the work of Carol Pierce Hutchinson and Patricia Elwood, for cross-referencing cognitive care patient records against open missing persons databases in cases where the patient reports early childhood dislocation. It is a narrow protocol, but it has already opened 3 other cases in 2 years. Robert Pierce spent 34 years writing down everything he saw. He wrote the name of a man he didn't suspect. He kept a plate number because he was a man who kept plate numbers. He died not knowing what he had written. Anna Pierce, 4 years old, in a yellow dress on a June morning in Harlan County, Kentucky, is 63 years old now. She lives near her sister. She has been told about Rusty, and about Buster the Cloth Rabbit, and about the Blackberry Cobbler, and about the mantle photograph that Della Pierce kept for the rest of her life, without adding to it, because there was nothing to add. There is no adequate accounting for 60 years. There is no word for what was taken from that family on Clover Creek Road. But there is something that happened in a care facility in Florida when a woman who didn't know her own history looked at a photograph of a Kentucky hillside and said she remembered a dog named Rusty. And there is something that happened when Carol Pierce Hutchinson sat across from her sister at a small table in June of 2022 and heard her name said aloud. What Robert Pierce understood, working alone with his notebooks for 34 years, is what every family in a case like this understands. The truth does not disappear. It waits. Sometimes it waits longer than a human life, but it waits. Before we close, I want to ask you a few things. The Grover family never faced justice. Does a case like this feel resolved to you when the perpetrators are already gone? Or does the reunion change that calculus? What detail in this case affected you most? The notebook, the DNA match, or that single sentence about the dog? And what do you think it says about how we treat the long-term missing that Anna Pierce was in a care facility for years before anyone connected her to an open case? Justice found Anna Pierce after 60 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists, and why we keep digging when the records are old and the answers aren't easy. If you believe the truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More solved cold cases are waiting for you in the description. Thank you for being here.